In this video, we will talk about what producer's surplus is. So let's suppose that we have a supply equation now, written in the form P equals S of Q. So I'm just calling my supply function S, and it's a function of Q. So what this means is where the supplier is willing to supply Q items, so Q is the number of items that they're going to be willing to supply, at a price of, so the way I find the price is I plug Q into this function, and whatever S of Q is, that is my price. All right, so what I want to do is I want to begin by drawing a graph of kind of a general supply curve. So I'll have Q, whoops, let's put some arrows here. I'll have Q on the x-axis as before, and P on the y-axis, following our convention from this section. And supply curves typically are increasing, unlike demand curves, which are typically decreasing. So I want to make a note of this to explain why. So with supply curves, as the price goes up, the supplier is usually willing to supply more, to increase the quantity, to increase Q, the quantity they're supplying. Because the higher the prices, the supplier is typically like, oh, let me get in on that. I can make more money because now the price is even higher. Because the price that the supplier is selling it for is even higher. So it benefits them to sell more of it. Alrighty, so that corresponds to this shape. So when the price goes up, we would expect the quantity that they supply to go up. Okay, so that it corresponds to this increasing graph shape. So as we did in the previous videos, somewhere on the Q axis, I'm going to put a tick mark, and I'm going to say, let's call the number of items here Q bar. And I'm going to draw a dashed line up to the curve, to my supply curve, and then whatever this corresponding price is, I'm going to call that P bar. And now we are ready to define a key term from this video, which is what producer's surplus is. So first I'll state the general definition, and then we'll talk about what it is as a formula. So the producer's surplus is the actual revenue that they would make from selling however many items that they get to sell at whatever price they get to charge for it, minus the minimum they're willing to receive. Because when you subtract how much they actually get, their actual revenue, by sort of the minimum threshold of what they would have been okay with getting, that's extra money in their pockets. And that's why it's called a surplus. It's the surplus to the producer. Okay, so the actual revenue would be the price that they get to charge times the quantity that's sold, Q bar. And I can also think of that as an integral, because P bar times Q bar, well, that would just be the area of this rectangle. That's the area of that rectangle. And as an integral, that's the integral from 0 to Q bar. And it's under this horizontal line, under that horizontal line, going through P bar. Okay, and this is dq, because my variable here on the x-axis is Q. So for the minimum that they're willing to receive, I'm going to give sort of a heuristic, kind of conceptual reason for what the formula is for that. So if I think about some quantity here, like let's say there was some quantity here, and I'm putting this orange tick mark, that the supplier may have supplied. So at that particular quantity, they the consumer needs to see this price on it. They would only be willing to sell it for at least that price. And if I were to increase the quantity a little bit, so if I were to go to different quantity, the supplier would need to sell it for at least this price, for at least that price to be happy. Now, of course, if they could sell it for more, awesome, they would be really, really happy with that, but at least that price. And I can keep going like this. For any particular quantity here on the Q axis, the supplier would need to see at least this price to be happy with it. So if I think about, what's kind of going on, I need to sort of consider all of these outcomes and all of these values that the supplier would have been okay with receiving up until when I get to Q bar items. And the way I would measure that is by looking at the area under this supply curve. And by the way, let's label the equation of that. This was P equals S of Q. That was my supply equation. Okay, so we need to subtract away the area under S of Q, which I'll express as an integral. So I need to subtract away the integral from 0 to Q bar of this time it's just S of Q, dQ. Okay, and then we can combine these into one integral. And doing that, we'd get integral from 0 to Q bar of P bar minus S of Q dQ, and that is my producer's surplus. So that is the equation for producer's surplus. And graphically, when we subtract the area of, when we do the area of the rectangle minus this orange area under the supply curve, what we're left with is this area here. This is my producer's surplus, PS. So in terms of our goals, we've talked about what the producer's surplus is. So I'm going to check this goal off, although technically I haven't done an example where I've actually computed this, but regardless, I know the formula for producer's surplus. So the next video, we'll do a longer example, and in part of that, I will actually compute a producer's surplus.